president of the Wisconsin League of Women's Voters, Tempo, and on the board of Wisconsin Council of the Blind and Visually Impaired. Also secretary of the Madison Equal Opportunity Commission and chair of the Appeals Committee. Ray, the good stuff. BS in biochemistry, Bachelor of Science, I assume. From the University of Iowa, moved to Madison in '86 to take a position with a small biotech startup called Omega, which grew to become an international leader in molecular biology and molecular diagnostic products. He was posted for extended stays at Omega's joint venture in China in '89 and 2008. He has hosted numerous multi-month stays of scientists from China and Russia, in addition to hosting scientists from the UK, France, Switzerland, Lithuania, Japan, South Korea, and Australia, and contributed book chapters and journal articles to scientific literature. So I introduce to you Melanie and Ray.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks for the introduction. And thank you, Adam, for not looking up my name on Google and finding some other things about me that are not quite so complimentary. I want to thank Dan and Adam for inviting us here today. What initially drew our interest in speaking with you is we have a number of members of Rotary that are part of our organization as well. And for those of us who aren't currently part of Rotary, like myself, we find ourselves being pulled in that direction. So I may be a future member. We're from the Madison Committee on Foreign Relations. We have a different focus from Rotary. Rotary, of course, is more interested in service to the local community and the international community. We're more interested in learning about global affairs and relations between countries, different social, political, and religious movements in the world, different shifting alliances. Sometimes we do deep dives into individual countries as well. Other interests are things like security or resources. Global health has certainly been a major topic recently with COVID. Melanie, can you hit the button? We're a nonprofit that existed in Madison since 2003. We generally bring in speakers about 7 times a year in the fall, and then take a little break in December and January, and then start up again in February. We bring in these speakers. They could be from anywhere in the world. Some of them are from the US, but also many of them are traveling from other countries. And kind of like Rotary, we all experienced some difficulties during the pandemic. We had to go to largely virtual presentations, which worked out well. It kept our organization going. But now we're back to in-person meetings, which we all really enjoy. The camaraderie, I can just feel it in the room right here. And it's the same thing with MCFR. Get the next one? Oh, you did. Okay. In just the last 2 years, some of the topics that we've covered, you can read there, a lot of it is about economy or trade policies, food security. We had an interesting one just recently about the state of journalism in Hong Kong, now that China has taken full control of the territory and how that's impacted journalism. Middle East is always a topic. It's always important, and the rise of political Islam. We've had several different talks on that. Comparative politics, global affairs, a lot of things have to do with risk assessment, strategic planning, how various countries or various alliances approach their risk assessment and their strategic planning. And occasionally we, like I said before, we take just a deep dive into individual countries to try and learn more about those countries. the last 2 years, we've had deep dives into Russia, Ukraine, India, Brazil, and I'm trying to think there's one more in there as well. Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide. Our speakers generally have extensive experience and a lot of times in multiple different organizations. A lot of them come from the U.S. State Department or USAID. Some of them come from foreign governments. A while back, we had the ambassador to the U.S. from Estonia as part of a 3-speaker panel, which I found very interesting hearing his perspective on things. So they come from a variety of both domestic and foreign governmental organizations. A fair number of them also have some experience or are currently part of academic institutions, both foreign and domestic. I would say that's probably half and half or so. So it's kind of interesting getting the perspective from a foreign academic and how they view their country, say, versus the way the U.S. press covers their country. A lot of these people, like I say, they've done multiple things. So maybe they were in an academic institution, or maybe they were part of a government organization, but now they're acting as consultants to governments, or they're part of think tanks or policy institutes. So a lot of these people have experience from multiple different perspectives, which also makes for a pretty interesting talk. One of the things that we really would like to do, besides just a little background about Madison Committee on Foreign Relations, we'd also like to give you maybe some highlights. So Melanie and I are going to kind of tag team some highlights of presentations just in the last couple of years to give you a little flavor of the speakers and the type of topics and the things we've learned. So I'll hand it over to Melanie for the first one.
I'm going to talk just a few minutes about our speaker who spoke about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This was Dr. Chad Briggs. Dr. Briggs actually took his PhD here at the University of Wisconsin, but he is now a professor at the University of Alaska, but he also works now for a large consulting company, and they consult with countries in evaluating their security risks on various issues. They bring together the military, the environmental, the financial, and tell a country how much risk this is. So what he was speaking with us about was the risk that's involved for the global world in terms of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The basic problem in Ukraine, of course, was that Putin actually was opposed to breaking up of the Soviet Union. And so ever since then, he's been trying to get it back together. And so a few years ago, in the last 3 or 4 years, as you may know, Russia really took over Chechnya and tried to take over part of the country of Georgia. And so they really had the idea that since Mr. Zelensky was elected president of Ukraine in 2019, well, they had a new president and things were not maybe as settled as they were. So this would be a good time for Russia to try to overtake the Ukraine because they wanted part of the Ukraine. Now, one of the issues, of course, was that there's a part of eastern Ukraine where some of the Donbas region, where some of the people have said, well, they would rather be in Russia. Well, this would be like, for example, if you took the state of Maine in this country, and the north of Maine, as many of you know, there are a large number of French Canadians. So if those people said one day, we want to go and be part, we think we'd rather be part of Canada, and Canada said, okay, good, we'll just come down and lop off part of the state of Maine and we'll take you in. Well, this is the same thing if Russia were to take over the Donbas region in the Ukraine. So in any event, Russia decided this was the time to strike and to try to take over all of Ukraine. Ukraine has 41 million people. Russia has 147 million people. So it's really a David and Goliath kind of thing. So one of the issues, of course, for the other countries in the world was what to do. Of course, NATO had many of the countries around that area are members of NATO. So how was NATO supposed to act in terms of protecting its own interests, and Germany and other countries in Europe, how were they supposed to help out Ukraine? And then what was the United States supposed to do? And because again, the United States has interest in Ukraine, as we'll talk about in a minute. So it posed a very big challenge for all of the countries of the world is what they were going to do. One of the significant issues, of course, is that most of Europe is very dependent on Russia for its gas. And so Russia then, because they had a number of sanctions against them, they began to say, if you're going to get our gas, you're going to have to pay in rubles, which of course made it even a different problem for the Western countries to buy the gas from. And then the second thing is that Ukraine is a great exporter of wheat. And of course, that had tremendous effect in Europe and also in Africa, who were dependent upon the wheat that they had been getting from Ukraine. So this became a big international issue. And then, of course, for us in this country, the question is, what kind of aid do we give? And as you all know, we have had a habit of running in and sending in people and so forth. But many Americans are sort of tired of us always, getting involved in every place in the world. So this time we said, we're not going to send in people, we're going to send in other kinds of aid to help out. And so this is what we have done. And one of the other issues, of course, that he spoke about was how long is this war going to go on? So the longer it goes on, the more impetus that it gives to other countries to get involved and to try to figure out what to do. One of the significant problems has been the country of Turkey, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but in Turkey has not ever condemned Russia for what it's done, and Turkey is a NATO member too. So this is not a really simple thing. And one of the things that's happened now, of course, is that many people have fled to Ukraine who could. And as you know, we have a number of Ukrainians here in the Madison area now who we have been assisting. Various clubs and various organizations have been assisting them. And then it has also set up a humanitarian crisis because many Ukrainians have escaped over into Poland. And of course, Poland is a member of the EU. Poland's a member of NATO. And so Poland has had this huge influx of refugees there. So this again is an issue that we've been involved in, and the World Food people have been involved in trying to help feed these people. So the whole situation in Ukraine has been really a security threat to lots of the countries in the world, including us. And so it was very interesting to hear him explain, how it's been affecting different places and how it will continue to affect us depending on how long this goes on.
All right, thanks, Melanie. I'll try and kind of keep it moving here. One of the other talks was recently was a deep dive into Bolsonaro's Brazil, and specifically Bolsonaro's influence on Brazil. A couple of demographic things that I wasn't aware of, that Brazil in centuries past imported more slaves than any other country in the Americas. So whenever you talk about Brazil and the various immigrations, indigenous people in Brazil, you have to pay particular attention to the slaves that were brought in. Also, another thing that was very key for Bolsonaro, 30 years ago, 90% of the country was Catholic. And now 50% is Catholic and 50% is evangelical. So there's been a huge evangelical movement in Brazil. Couple of things in Bolsonaro's original campaign platform. He campaigned heavily on increasing wages for low wage earners. But as is often the case, once he got elected, the only two sectors of society that really gained were the military and the wealthy, not the low wage earners that he promised. He made a central plank in his campaign to do away with environmental regulations, wanted to open up the economy, and all the regulations about cutting down the forests in the Amazon were just getting in the way. So that was a big part of it. He also aggressively sought and received the support from those evangelicals. And also, as you might expect, from the wealthy land interest. Once he got into office, inflation just went crazy during COVID, did an extremely poor job of managing the economy during the COVID years. He canceled Brazil's growing space industry. You remember a while back, they were actually launching some satellites and had kind of an up and coming space program, but he canceled that because a lot of those satellites that were being launched by Brazil were used to monitor deforestation of the Amazon. So he wanted to get rid of that. And another little tidbit about Bolsonaro, he was extremely upset when Trump lost the 2020 election. From the very beginning, he felt like he and Trump were kind of kindred spirits. And so it was very upsetting to him when Trump lost, because he could then see his own vulnerabilities and shortcomings. All right, I'll hand it back to Melanie for the next synopsis.
Yes, we have Dr. Christopher Barrett from Cornell University with us, and he is an economist with a specialty in food. And it was very interesting because of, while we were speaking about the situation in Ukraine, apparently the United States government approached him. He had actually previously also worked at the CIA to say, look, this situation in Ukraine with the wheat and so forth, can you convene some experts to see, how this is going to affect us and sort of what's going to happen generally in terms of food. So in any event, as he talked with us, he said that there were really 4 major drives that had to do with the world food crisis, and there is a crisis. And one of the primary ones is climate change. And climate change happening all over the world, of course, that is disrupting the way that people have been able to grow certain kinds of crops and so forth. So that's been a very big one. The conflicts in the world, where there are all these wars and so forth, and you've seen the migration of people and the huge numbers of refugees. 75% of the refugees in the world are children. And this is a very critical issue. And this is interesting for us as Rotarians. I don't know if you know or not, but Rotary International has put a lot of money into the development of a certain kind of food that is made available to refugees, especially the children. And some of you may have sampled it because I had the opportunity to sample it. It's sort of like peanut butter. And a child can get like a half a cup of this, and it provides all of the vitamins and minerals they need in a whole day. And so this is what's being given in the refugee camps for sure every single day, to be sure that the children have enough vitamins and minerals, that they have energy to grow and their minds develop and so forth and so on. So I think as Rotarians, we can be very proud of being involved in this, because when I tasted it, you all know who have traveled all over the world, peanut butter is not known anywhere in the world but the United States. And so for this is a new food, kind of for these children. But it's been a wonderful thing that we've been able to help with, because this is absolutely critical. And then a second or third thing is the whole issue of macroeconomics and how governments get involved when there's a food shortage. And he's pointed out how the government in this country handled the pandemic with regard to food. And as you know, what they did was, to people who were on food stamps, who were people who had less money to buy food, their food stamp amount was doubled and sometimes tripled, which enabled them to feed their family during the pandemic, which is why we didn't have such a big crisis. In fact, that program only just ended last month, because with children staying home from school, not going to school, the family then had to provide more food every day that ordinarily, if they had children, they got a lunch at school, but now they had to eat at home all the time and so forth. So this was would have been a critical issue. But fortunately, this government, our government, stepped in and said, we're not going to have this. We're going to be sure that everybody has enough food. Other governments don't do that or can't do that. Most of the time it's don't do that. And the second thing is here, as you may have noticed, because this plan ended, the city of Madison has now put in a hunk of money to the food banks. And this is again to be sure, because this is such a critical issue. And then a fourth issue that has to be addressed are the international trade agreements that have been developed, and the policies and regulations that were developed in the 1990s that are now sort of out of date. For example, we see countries now banning the export of certain food supplies that they weren't supposed to be able to do. But he was very positive about the future. And one of the things that he says is happening and has to continue to happen is the unbundling of the production of food with land. Because now it is possible to produce a lot of food not out of the soil. And this food I just mentioned that we've been a part of at Rotary is not produced in the ground. It's produced in a laboratory. And so this unbundling is going to enable us and the world to produce a lot more food. Another technology that's being used is that at the time of harvest of certain foods, they can inject into the ground right by the plants to be harvested vitamins and minerals that will increase the vitamin and mineral content of certain products, like corn was one of them he spoke about. So the advances in science are really going to help us be able to deal with the food crisis. And the basic concept, of course, is that when we talk about production of food, we also have to know we need to advocate for the poor, because the poor are the ones that have the least money available in which to buy food or with which to buy food. And I think the basic concept to keep in mind is that food is a human right. Food is a human right, and it's in the United Nations Charter, and that we believe it's a human right. And so therefore we as Rotarians and humanity need to be sure that all people have access to adequate food.
All right. Thanks again, Melanie. In the interest of time, I'm going to try and keep my remarks very brief about the Kurds. But a couple of things I would like to highlight. We hear about the Kurds over and over. They certainly helped us in our fight against ISIS. They were a major thorn in the side of Saddam when he was in power in Iraq. But the Kurds are actually not a highly defined group. They're very diverse. They're sort of loosely held together by language, but there are 5 different languages spoken by various Kurdish groups, depending on what areas they're in. And in some places, they don't even speak a Kurdish language, but they're self-identifying as Kurds because Turkey has tried to wipe out their native language, or Iraq or Syria has tried to wipe out their native language. So all the Kurds don't even speak one of the Kurdish languages anymore, but they still identify themselves as Kurds. They do not consider themselves Turks. They do not consider themselves Arabs, and they do not consider themselves Persians. They consider themselves a separate group. Also, part of this diversity of the Kurds, there's 7 different religions represented. More are Sunni Muslim than anything else, but there are also Shiite Muslims or Christians or Jews, there are Yazidis, and a couple of other religions. So they're a very, very diverse group, spread out among Turkey, Iraq, Iran, Syria, Armenia, and a few other countries. The basic story of Kurdish history is they've always desired a state, and they've always been betrayed. They had a lot of hope after World War I, when a lot of those boundaries were redrawn, that they would finally achieve statehood. But of course, there were bigger powers that intervened and prevented that. Over the years since World War I, they've constantly had aspirations of having their own state. But again, this theme of diversity, there's like 12 identifiable important political parties within the Kurdish groups, and they're always infighting with each other. All right, in the interest of time, even though I could go on a little bit, I think I'll pass it back to Melanie for the next talk.
Well, the last speaker that we just had was speaking about Turkey. And this was a scholar, and he was in London when he spoke with us. And as you know, it's one of the downsides of the Zoom that we're many, but one of the upsides, I should say, is that you can have people that you ordinarily wouldn't be able to have. So he was in London, and we actually had him at noon one day. But he was Turkish, and he's a scholar at the London School of Economics and also a lecturer at Yale. And what he was pointing out to us, of course, is that Turkey is 100 years old this year, and it was formerly a part of the Ottoman Empire. And there's a movement in Turkey now to go back to the Ottoman Empire, but you know, it's sort of hard to do. But in any event, we described the history of Turkey, and especially since 2014, since the president of Turkey was elected, who's president now, Erdogan. And all through that, through these last years, of course, the government's become much more restrictive, and he is something of an authoritarian. And although there was a coalition government formed, also since the beginning of the founding of Turkey, the Islamic Party has become a part of the government and very strong in the parliament there. So one of the interesting things that I had not realized is that Turkey wants to be considered the leader of the Islamic world. And to that end, they have financed the building of 1,000 mosques all over the world as an attempt to, you know, say, well, here we're really nice people, we're building a nice mosque for you. And so they have been interested in spreading their own form of Islamism. The other thing is that their close relationship with Russia has to do with the fact that the Kurds and northern Syria, and also some Turks lived in northern Syria. So Turkey invaded that area of Syria to try to take it over for their people. Well, that didn't work out too well, and it ended up that Russia came in and negotiated a settlement between Syria, the Kurds, and the Turks. The upshot of that was that a lot of them, the Turks were trying, and Syrians were trying to get out of Syria. And so Turkey then took in several million Syrian refugees. It has the longest border of any country with Syria. The United States then stepped up and gave Turkey 6 million euros to help feed and take care of all these refugees. But the president did not spend the money on the refugees. He just spent a little bit on the refugees, spent the rest on himself, and I don't know what. But in any event, he also not only has been building the mosques around, he has established a lot of schools. And the rule in Turkey is that only people, Islamic children can only go to Islamic schools. They can't go to any kind of public schools. And he also established a number of universities that apparently are staffed not with really highly qualified people. And so this has necessitated a lot of movement in the country, and also a lot of necessity of building of housing. Well, they didn't have enough housing, so he encouraged the building of a lot of housing. Well, now we just saw what happened with the earthquakes. A lot of the housing that he was demanding be built apparently was put together with masking tape or something. And when the earthquakes came, they all fell down. And he is up for election this year. So it'll be very interesting to see how he's handled this earthquake situation and how it may affect him getting reelected. Because a lot of people are blaming him now. They're blaming him because the houses all fell down, and how he's handled the earthquake. So this is really an area of the world to be aware of and to be interested in seeing what happens there this year.
All right, thanks again, Melanie. And in the interest of time here, so we do have a few moments for a question. I'll keep my remarks about China brief. One of our recent speakers was an economist who was posted at the embassy in Beijing. And his job there was to keep track of the Chinese economy and also help facilitate U.S. businesses that wanted to do business in China. one of the things he was speaking about, I thought very interesting, is in past years, China was extremely open about their economic data. It was published, it was freely available, it was on the web, it was very easy for someone like him to actually confirm claims that the government was making about GDP and other economic indicators. But over the last several years, as things have kind of tightened a little bit in China, and they're maybe having a little more trouble meeting those GDP targets, all of a sudden, all this information starts becoming less and less and less available. We always think of China as just being this economic juggernaut. You know, there's no stopping it. They're just on a roll. They're going to steamroll the rest of the world. Well, they're certainly still on a very good trajectory, but there's starting to be a few chinks in that armor and that invincibility. There are four main components to the Chinese economy. One is domestic consumption, and that's continuing to grow as the standard of living in China continues to go up. But that's really not a major driver in their economy. Exports is a major driver, but that's proven to be a little more variable, a little less reliable in the last several years. Global recessions, it's out of China's control. So that'll have impacts on their export. They have supply chain issues too. And during their COVID lockdowns, especially, certain companies could not get the things they needed from other companies due to a lockdown in that regional area. Tariffs have also become a little bit more of a significant factor in their export market. Trump instituted a number of tariffs. A lot of other countries in the world have become concerned about their reliance on China for products, especially during COVID. We saw, just one example with personal protective equipment, gloves and masks and things like that. So even though it may have a slight additional cost for kind of security reasons, a lot of companies are pulling back, a lot of countries are pulling back from buying things from China and starting to manufacture them themselves. Third thing, they always predicate a lot of their GDP on infrastructure. Being not that long ago, maybe considered a third world country, and now being somewhat of a first world country, at least in certain areas, well, there's tremendous capacity for upgrading transportation, upgrading utilities, upgrading all these things. Well, okay, you didn't have an airport in this city before. Now you build an airport. Well, you get an economic boost in that area from that airport. But now what do you do 5 years later? You're not going to build another airport. There's very little economic gain for that. You've already done this massive improvement infrastructure. So investing more infrastructure on top of that has much, much less of an impact. And then also local governments were boosting their local economies and therefore looking good in the eyes of the central government by expanding real estate, by building housing developments and technology and business parks and everything else. And we're borrowing large amounts of money to do this development. But there really wasn't a market need. And so they way overbuilt. The market really didn't demand it. And now they've got a lot of ghost cities and ghost developments with these local governments very, very highly leveraged to build that. And so there's kind of a big real estate bubble going on in China right now. So anyway, just a few quick things about the Chinese economy. To try and wrap up here quick. These are too many. Our upcoming talks for this program year, we have one coming up on lithium sourcing from Lithuania, or not Lithuania, sorry, Latin America. Lithium, of course, is an extremely important resource as we try and decarbonize. We have another one kind of on global health security. What are the lessons learned from COVID? and how can the world better prepare for the next pandemic? You know, right at the moment, okay, we've gotten over the hump on COVID, so it's not in the news quite so much anymore. Well, let's be prepared for the next one. And then our final talk of the year will be kind of one that ties a lot of things together, mostly focused on climate change and how the world responds to climate change, but how the various factors of nationalism and economics and security factor into how the world deals with climate change. Go ahead and hit the next one. Just a little bit of a wrap up about MCFR. Our yearly membership dues are $150 per year. Right at the moment, we have a $75 half year membership. We go on a September to May calendar. Our events are all in person now. We hold them at the Madison Club. There's a sit-down dinner, a wine pour, coffee, dessert, lots of time for camaraderie like you have at your Rotary meetings. I think you'd find the people at MCFR very, very similar to what you have here. People with a lot of personal travel experience and a lot of professional experience as well. And also having in-person sit-down dinners. It gives you a little more time to interact with our speakers before dinner, or you're possibly sitting at the table with them during dinner. And at the end, we also have question and answer and discussion, which sometimes can be very interesting as well. Various members of our group may have particular expertise of their own and wish to converse with our speakers in some aspect of their presentation. I've also got some business cards and some flyers on the side table here that give a little more information, or our website, if anybody wants to grab one on the way out. At this time, I'd like to thank you again for inviting us. Enjoyed the sandwich and enjoyed the feel of camaraderie in the room. And at this time, I guess I'll open it up for questions.
How many members do you have, and what can you characterize the membership?
Right at the moment, we're sitting at 52 members. We've been a little larger in the past. We've been up to 70. But as you may have realized too, during COVID and trying to do everything virtually, there was a little attrition during that time. I would characterize our membership, the majority for sure are retired professionals. You know, I don't know, what would you say, Melanie? A lot of doctors, lawyers.
Well, and also I think they're basically citizens of the world, just like you all are. You know, a lot of them have traveled all over. Some are, you know, consultants and all over, and they're really interested in the world and what goes on. And just like you all are too. So it's a very interesting group, and we, you know, we don't want to get it to be a huge organization, but we want it to be an organization so that we can meet kind of like this and get to know each other and have some interesting conversations.
Yes.
So you're collecting and sharing a lot of really interesting information. Is there any?
Pardon me?
A lot of this information is really important. And is any of it shared with any of our national government departments or anything, so they can get a better sense of what's going on in the country?
Well, I think certainly the goal of our organization is to be much better informed ourselves. And then we talk to our neighbors, our friends, our politicians, letters to the editor. There's a few people in our group that are prolific letters to the editor writers. And so I think we're mostly focused on trying to learn more ourselves first, and then spread that information out in whatever way we can. Yes.
Fascinating discussion. Thanks for being here. I'm curious what kind of reaction you're getting from the speakers about the United States. I'm curious what they think of us, where we are such a divided country. We have people who attack our capital. We can't even agree that it was a riot. It was a peaceful protest. So I'm curious what they think of us.
Well, that's a very interesting question. And I'd probably have to say, there's 50 of us and one of them. So we're usually peppering them with lots of additional questions about their area of expertise rather than getting their reflection on us. But there are little nuggets that come out. The ambassador to the US from Estonia, he had a very interesting comment, I thought. Somebody from the audience, was kind of derogatory to the US education system and saying, I bet most high school students couldn't find Estonia on the map, if their life depended on it. And we should be teaching more world geography and everything. And he actually disagreed with that. And he said, no, don't worry about world geography. Anybody can look that up. Teach critical thinking. He said, we were part of the Soviet Union for decades. In 1991, we got our independence. We share a big border with Russia. Russia's not happy about it. Russia's constantly bombarding us with propaganda and information, disinformation, misinformation, everything. It has no effect because they focus a lot on teaching critical thinking, and their students and their population is very clearly just sees right through it. Any other questions or? Thank you very much for having us. Thank you. I'll give the microphone back to you, Dave. Thank you. That was great. I really appreciate you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank everybody for being here today.
That's mine. Melanie, pull mine.
Looks like the meeting's ended here, but thank you. We make a contribution for End Polio Plus for all our speakers. We'll do the same for you. And thank you everybody for being here. Next week, we have Alan Arnston who will be here to go over the future of potential plans for the Lake Winona waterfront. Right. I got it all. Have a great Rotary week, everybody.